Cornel West sits down with Candace Owens.
We have both of you here. You had that fight on Fox.
They had a public spat, so they decided to sit down together and hash these things out.
Some black people can get very upset with me because I say, you want me to focus on white supremacy when we know that 95% of black Americans that are killed by other black people.
There's a legitimate point here that must be contended with.
19 a day.
95%.
Yeah.
So my chances, I should be more afraid sitting next to a black man, all right, than if you're looking at just statistics. People don't like that, because that's the truth. They don't like that. Black Americans, we make up 13% of the population, and we account for over 50% of all the homicides in this country.
Imagine you have two buckets. A bucket is filled with 13% water, the other bucket 50%, but you're pulling from both 50% of the time. Well, you're disproportionately pulling from the 15%, which on the surface appears biased.
Is it possible that we're getting arrested more because we're committing more of the crimes?
Oh no, in terms of getting arrested
I'm talking
for a particular
homicides.
crime.
13% of the population.
We're talking about police
57%.
killing or being pulled over
But what leads to being arrested? An encounter with police.
So you're
for driving in the
saying
car and so forth. When in terms of the sheer number of homicides, you've got a disproportionate number of poor black people, disproportionately men.
But we're disproportionately committing the crimes in this country, all of them, across the board.
No, not all of them. No, not white collar crime.
That's an important distinction that Cornell points out there.
Not Wall Street crime.
I'm talking about
You're talking about
violent crimes.
You're talking about like
White collar
murder,
crimes.
Yes, absolutely,
You're
absolutely.
correct. But 95%
disproportionate
every year,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
of black Americans that are killed in a homicide event are killed by other black people. Everybody turns away from it. We're not going to talk about it because, oh, it was happening in our community. Let's instead go out and protest in the strange event that a black American gets shot by a police officer unarmed.
Which is an anomaly. It happens at an incredibly low rate.
We're talking about a slither of people, black Americans, that are killed by whites in this country annually, and yet the focus on it would make you think it's happening every single day.
But two things. One is that there is a difference between a policeman who kills a person and a citizen killing another citizen.
So Cornel West tries to counter this by claiming, well, but there's a difference between a black person shooting someone and a police officer shooting someone.
Because the police represent.
True, but they're killing 19 a day.
The
blacks
numbers,
are like
absolutely.
10 a year.
But within the past year, the number of unarmed people, not even black, that were killed by a police officer, somewhere between 25 and 50, depending where you look.
But that does not mean, though, that you don't want to keep these police accountable when they shooting these young folk.
What are you basing that claim on? Let's see if he backs this up.
Day in and day out.
Accountable. They go
Not
to
day in
jail.
and day
They
out.
lose their
They
pension.
go to jail. You got one going to jail,
Hold
brother.
up.
And there's going to be anecdotal evidence. There's going to be times when this occurs, but I imagine you could count that on one hand.
You got one going to jail out of all these
Let's correct
shootings.
the record. This is not happening day in, day out. In the year where they made it seem like it was the absolute worst, in 2016, 16 unarmed black men were shot and killed. By rate, more white men were killed by...
It's 1,000
But also,
in the country.
white men,
unarmed can mean was armed.
Yeah,
it can mean trying to kill you with the car.
That's correct. 16, even if we're being generous, 16, you had a higher chance as a black American man of being struck by lightning than you did of being shot unarmed.
That's a very compelling way to present this argument that you have a higher chance of being struck by lightning, because that's a visual. We are narrative creatures who make sense of the world through stories.
Okay, white men were killed by police officers at a higher rate, as were Hispanic men. We know none of their names because it was a narrative.
No, you're right.
It just
about
sounds
that.
like there's a lot
Absolutely.
of disingenuous agenda
That's my
with
thing.
the
It's
left.
like, just be
and at the
real.
beginning of
But
this,
the
you were
problem
saying,
is, though, you got to have a press that is open enough to deal with all of these issues candidly.
The press is invested in business and engagement, and conflict drives story. That fits into the sponsor of today's video, Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that lets you compare perspectives on any topic with full transparency on the political bias, financial incentives, and credibility behind the headlines. Whatever the debate shaping our lives is, the narratives we hear can shape what we think before we've even had a chance to question it. Critical thinking is all about thinking for oneself to navigate the stories and the patterns that make up the world. We see the differences in these stories through the lens of the media. Follow your favorite topics or simply paste any article link in their search bar to find the full coverage on heated issues and swipe between perspectives to form your own opinion based on all the facts. Ground News was designed to give you back control over your thoughts. That's why they created their blind spot feed, one of the most important things to check before trying to have constructive dialogue with people who think differently than you. Go to ground.news/Smith or scan the QR code on the screen. Viewers get the top tier Vantage plan for just $5 a month, so it's a handy tool. How best to navigate those stories, that's where Ground News comes in.
Every Black American that I ask that says there's a Nazi or KKK presence, you just go, where? They go, I don't know, I read it somewhere.
Press is obsessed with the Nazi shit. They're obsessed with hate, hate, hate. We live in a racist society. It's way worse than it was in the 70s.
So to me, it's all a farce. And I think it is because the liberal media...
No, but you and I are critical of liberal media, but I think you have to have a bit more open-mindedness at the spectrum and the continuum.
What does that mean, the spectrum and the continuum?
We've got statistics on the percentages of black men who will be pulled aside in the car.
But is that representative of the crime rate which is occurring? 16% of the population, 50% of crimes, you are going to be pulling from that bucket at a higher frequency. We have to look closer.
The percentage of men who, when we went to jail in New York City about, 8 years ago here with the stop and frisk, when you had over 90% of the folks stop and frisk were young black brothers and brown brothers.
And if you were to implement the stop and frisk, you would see what Roland Fryer was describing with the outcomes test. And I'm not saying that stop and frisk is a good policy.
There was
Now,
not
those
over
are not
90%.
killings. Those are not killings.
Right.
They were
But they're on a
disproportionately
spectrum.
pulling over whites.
No. Oh, not at all.
As they appeared in the crime
brother.
stats.
Interesting point from Gavin, but I think it's equally simplistic. It's where they pulled over for speeding, a headlight. You don't just get pulled over in a similar way as stop and frisk.
Yes.
No.
The way
Even when
blacks
the
and whites
judge
appeared in the
goes,
New York
brother,
crime stats, they were pulled over less than that. There was more whites pulled over than they appeared in the crime stats.
But you remember the woman who
Bloomberg even conceded that.
who was the judge when she went through all the statistics and said, "My God, under Bloomberg,
Yes,
you had
and she was
over
later
3
fired
some
for
minor-"
incompetence.
I didn't realize that Cornel West was actually there that day at Charlottesville.
You were?
Oh yeah, I was right there.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah,
And he was standing next to the young woman who was hit by the vehicle.
and we were right there, and Heather was right on the side. We were talking just 20 minutes before she was hit.
But it's interesting to hear Cornel West describe the events on the ground that day. They insinuate that the police intentionally were pulled back.
We were standing there, and as they walked by, after about 20 minutes, it got more and more intense. Police pulled back completely.
That's what jeopardized your life.
Police pulled back
The
completely.
mayor trying to cause a
Yes.
scene.
Well, this was a crucial factor. I agree with that.
And I do give Cornel West respect for doing this, calling out the media.
We have to speak the truth.
Yeah, I
And so the truth that you talk about in terms of disproportionately black on black violence is something that you have to speak to. But the second point is this, though, that there are a number of folk in the black community who both talk about it and try to organize against the black on black violence.
Who are the individuals he's referring to here? I guess he could be one. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, people that equally contend with these two narratives.
You
So
get it
why
in
aren't they?
preachers,
Why don't they have
you
the
get it in
platform that these Black Lives Matter groups have?
Well, one is because you got a liberal media that does not want to put a spotlight on black people organizing themselves and dealing with problems inside of the black community.
Because that would help us.
Well, I mean, that's a certain white supremacist sensibility.
Right, and that's what I
the
say.
media
So,
said.
agree.
Yeah, and ironically, you could make a more compelling argument towards systemic racism around what Cornel's describing here with legacy media. That's probably one of the most compelling arguments you could use.
We can
Right.
both sit here and we can have this
argument.
conversation
That's
and
right.
have an argument, and
That's
we do
right.
that.
Absolutely.
But the fact that he can go to a college campus and show up and he won't be met with Antifa protesters, right? And people trying to shut down the speech and threaten the event, and the university demanding that you pay for an absurd police presence that no one can really afford to put together. That's how you censor me. That's how you shut me down. So to me, that's institutionalized fascism that we see every day on the left. You will never see that on the right. You will never see any place that you go as conservative. You will be welcomed. We might say, hey, I disagree with him, you know, but I want to hear his ideas. So I think this dialogue, I think it's important so that people can determine who they actually think is right. If we don't talk, they're not getting a fair determination.